Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're making a chess set. Well, many years ago when I first started scrolling, I made a chess set and I gave it away as a gift. I don't know whatever happened to it, but either way, I made that one, and my skills weren't that great at the time, but I still plugged through, I still had fun with it, and ever since then, I've wanted to make another one, but I just haven't gotten around to it. Then not too long ago, I found this. And this is Making Wooden Chess Sets by Jim Cape. Now, this book has in it 15 complete patterns for 15 different chess sets. And I thought what I would do is make one for myself, but I didn't want to limit myself to just one of the sets. So what I did was I picked patterns from different sets to mishmash and make my own set with all of my favorite shaped pieces. And that's what we're going to make on the show. This all starts off with something that I actually learned from the book. I've made one before here on the show when I scrolled our hammer handle, but this one here is a little more custom for this application, and what it is a compound cutting jig. Well, the compound cutting jig starts off with two pieces of 3/4 inch plywood, and they are 1.5 inches wide, 9 inches long. And I'm just going to place a center line on each piece. On that center line from each end, we want to mark a position at 3/4 of an inch. One there. And then from one end, we will measure in at 5.5 inches. At each one of these points, we will drill a 5/16 diameter through hole. Now what I'm going to do is between this hole and this hole, so through this wider area or longer area here, I'm going to use a 5/16 diameter upcut spiral bit on the router table, and we are going to cut a groove from hole to hole there. And now you'll need a bit of hardware, and basically you need bolts that will be long enough to reach right through both of these pieces and yet allow a piece of 1.5 inch stock in the middle. In other words, you're going to need about a 4-inch bolt. I'm using 1/4 thread. I didn't have any bolts. So not to be discouraged, I just cut some 1/4 threaded rod. And what I'm going to do is I will spin my nut down a little bit, put it in the vise. I'm going to peen the end of this off with a hammer so that that nut can't loosen, and then I'll back it off till it jams against that peen. But from there, you just want to put a washer, place it through your slot just like this, and then you'll put another washer. And for me, I want to use a jig knob just because I have them. So we'll have a jig knob, and you will have 3 of these along your jig. And that, my friends, is essentially the jig done. And it will hold a chess piece here while cutting it, and it will hold a chess piece here. And this will do several things, but the main thing it's going to do is it's going to give you something to hold on to while scrolling so that you're not trying to hold this small little piece. So now that this jig is done, I'm going to show you how to use it in just a bit, but we now need to cut our stock for our chess set. Well, one of the keys to success of a project like this, especially one that concerns compound cutting on the scroll saw, is stock selection. And it's not so much about the wood you choose, more so than the preparation that you have to give it. And what you need is good, flat, square stock. I emphasize square. And you want to make sure that your pieces are square and that they're 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. Now, if they're not square, it is going to mess with your cutting. It is going to mess with everything now, because it's important in a project like this that you check your blade for square, especially on the scroll saw. And if the blade on the table is square, but the stock is not, you're no longer cutting square to your piece. So just make sure, please, that everything is perfectly square and you should have no problems. We have several pieces here. I've chosen to make mine out of my 2 favorite combinations, maple and walnut. And what you should need is 5 pieces, 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, that are 11 inches thick, 11 inches long each. I have 4 pieces, but they are 16 inches long each. So they're actually quite a bit more. All in all, I should have plenty of stock here. I do have some flaws in the maple here with this large knot, but we're going to work around that. So now you want to get into pattern placement. And let me just show you what the pattern looks like on a compound cut. So a compound cut pattern has 2 views. It has a front view and a side view, and it usually has a dotted line in between your 2 views. And what that dotted line represents is the corner of your stock. So your pattern will get mounted just like this, with your dotted line exactly in line with this stock here, and then it will get folded around and glued onto this side of the stock as well. Now, while the view of the front and the side may not be so obvious here with the rook, with the knight, it is quite obvious, where you have the front view and you have the side view of the horse's head. So with this now laid out, I have the patterns all cut out and ready to go for both sides of our pieces. We want to lay it out onto our stock just to make sure that we have enough and to get the maximum use out of our stock. So just take all of your pieces and lay them out in such a way so that you can make sure that you get the most number of pieces on your stock for the length that you've got. Well, there you go. This just demonstrates that 3 pieces, 16 inches long and 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches will be enough to cut one whole side of the chess piece. So I actually have an extra. That's okay. I'm good with that, because mistakes happen, and if I have to make an extra piece because I messed up, then I'll have that opportunity. So what we need to do at this point is we need to spray each of our pieces. I'm only going to do one of these boards at a time. We're going to spray each of our pieces with spray adhesive, let it tack up for 3 minutes, and then we're going to apply our pattern very carefully onto each one of our sections of stock here. Now, one thing I noticed in going through these patterns to make sure I had everything right before I started was that one of our pieces, or one of our patterns, being the king, does not have a center line. And that is kind of an important aspect of this project. So I'm going to carefully place it on the square here, place a mark where our center line should go, and I'll just add it to the pattern. So all we need to do is line up the corner very carefully, and then line up the other side of the corner, and then rub that down. And we will crease it and rub it down onto the other side of our blank, just like that. And you can tell if you've done it right or if everything is good. If you put a square across here, it should line up perfectly with the bottom of your pattern. So if that is square there, you're in good shape. So attach all of the other patterns on both your maple and your walnut stock, or whatever species you've chosen. Now the last thing that you need to do in order to prepare your stock is you need to use your miter fence and a fine cross-cut blade, and we're going to cut off each one of our chest pieces from the larger stock piece, and we're going to cut them so that the bottoms are all flat. So line up your stop with the bottom edge of each one of our chest pieces and cut them off to their rough dimensions. And with all those pieces separated, it is now time to put them on our jig. And I've done one more step here to the jig that I forgot to mention before, and that is I have placed a small little dado right here just on the inside of each one of our holes. So where we drilled the 5/16 hole here, I put the dado inside of it just a little bit, same here, and it's on the inner surfaces of our jig. And what that is going to be is blade entry holes. So now what we're going to want to do is take our pieces and place them in the jig. We'll just move this aside here. Now we can see that right here is where we want to start cutting. That's where the line meets the edge of our pattern. So we will line it up with our dados. You see that there? And that gives us a blade entry to get our scroll saw blade in. What other one do I want to cut here? Let's see. Let's do the rook, just for the heck of it. So once you get your pieces in there, you just want to hold your jig firmly together and tighten it up. And once you get it firmly tightened and you're happy with the way that they're seated in there, we can head over to the scroll saw. Well, I took the rook out of there because I wanted to start with the basic pieces, which were the pawns, and I want to show you the process of how to cut them. Now, if you'll notice, with each one of these dados that I've cut in our jig, they line up with where I want to start our cut on each one of the pieces. So they will be our blade entry hole. So let me just start with, I'm going to start with this middle one. So we'll just place our blade down through, attach it and tension it. Now I want to remind you, this is a tough cut. 1.5" walnut is a rough go. So we've got a brand new number 7 PGT blade installed. They're by Olson. And we're just going to cut the one perimeter all the way around. You want to try to keep the outside offcut or waist area intact. You want to keep it as whole as possible. So I'm going to do this one in real time just to show you how slow of a process this is, and then I'll show you what to do after we get this perimeter cut. Now for that sharp corner, remove your blade and then back it into the cut. Now it's very common in a cut that is this thick for the blade to loosen up on its tension. So every once in a while you just want to check it to make sure. You'll also notice on these really sharp ones here where it's hard to turn that blade, I'm actually going past the cut and then backing up to trim it up. We're still keeping quite a bit of our offcut or our waste area intact, but we're also giving it a much cleaner cut that way. So let's carry on. And just to finish that piece off, because it's so close to the end, instead of trying to mess around with turning the blade and all of that jazz, I'm going to actually take the blade out, reinsert it in the dado there, and cut from this side. Okay, so that is one part or one half of the piece cut. You can see how time consuming that is, and that will be the only real-time scrolling video I do during this show. What I'm going to do now is show you how to continue with the cut. So we're just going to loosen off the jig so that we can get our pieces out. And that piece that we just cut, you now want to remove it and rotate it 90 degrees so that your pattern is now facing up. And once you get it, line it up so that it is in place there with our dado so you can start the cut, and we will tighten down the jig. And from there, you just continue the exact same thing that you just did. You go around slowly cutting the entire piece. So I will cut this piece and then I'll show you what you end up with after you get the second cutting done. And unfortunately, guys, that's all the time that we have for this week. It doesn't look like we've covered that much, but when you really think about it, we've covered quite a bit. From getting our stock prepared down to attaching our patterns, the explanation of what compound cutting is, and then, of course, building the jig that will assist us to cut these pieces. I guess the other reason that we ran out of time is because of that excruciatingly long clip of cutting one side of the rook. So why bother putting it in? Well, honestly, truth be told, guys, look at the scrolling videos online that you see, and a lot of them give a very unrealistic time signature as far as how long it takes to cut a piece, therefore making it seem like it's a lot easier than what it is, and therefore causing a lot of frustrations in new users because they see the video on there that is sped up and they say, wow, well, how come I can't cut that fast? So then they try to cut that fast, and with a project like this, it causes problems. It causes excessive blade overheating and breakage. It causes a lot of excessive burning on your piece. It causes the blade to deflect, making uneven and not straight cuts. It causes a multitude of problems. And therefore, I felt it was necessary to put the full-length cutting into the show to give the realistic version of it, to show those of you who may be thinking, nah, I can't do that, or sitting on the fence, just to show you that, you know what, this is a slow process, even for someone who's been scrolling as long as what I have. So the key is slow. Something to take away from this video today, guys, is number 1, square stock. Number 2, square blade. Number 3, take your time and let the blade do its job. And number 4, have fun and enjoy it. Guys, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Click that bell so that you don't miss the notifications of future episodes of the program. There's a lot more to come on this build, and I hope you've enjoyed it so far. I hope it's inspired you to give this a try for yourself, because this compound cutting stuff is just a load of fun. I've been doing it for years. It's a blast. And more importantly, guys, I honestly hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.